Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, February 26th, and what's on your mind? What are the biggest developments in the past 48 hours, you
Right.
think?
Well, it's hard to keep up with things. Okay, of course, there is the ongoing negotiations and trading of insults regarding the mineral deal in Ukraine. There's a very recent news flash that Georgescu of Romania was detained on the
I
day
saw
that
that.
he was going to announce his his candidacy for the presidential elections. Both of those are very large news items. Um, yeah, and then there are just the broader conflicts, between the U.S. and Europe, um, and the question of really where, sometimes I feel very optimistic just when looking at that. And I think in general, there's more room for optimism than pessimism. We're in a very bad place, and I don't think under Biden it always seemed to get worse. It definitely is getting better now. The question is how much better? How long is that going to last? I don't know, because you get mixed signals from Trump, for example. You think that he's all on board with something, and then he contradicts himself in the next maybe 10 minutes later, or the next day, and we're getting some of that.
Okay, well, where do you want to start? Mineral deal, Romania, US, Europe.
Why don't we start with the mineral deal?
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, what we heard, we don't know what's actually being hammered out. There was I think, a news report yesterday that a deal had been reached, but now the most recent comments, I think, including from Marco Rubio, is that no, that hasn't happened. Um, Now, like, maybe just a little bit of background. It was in fact Zelensky who came up with this idea. You may remember, I think it was last summer that our friend from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, gave a speech, about where he's practically, I don't know, salivating with excitement. It was that there's a trillion or trillions of dollars worth of resources that would be ours if we continue to support Ukraine. And apparently, it's something that Zelensky. This was a result of, I think, conversations between Lindsey Graham and Zelensky, and then later Zelensky brought this up with Trump. I think it was before the election, and then he made it explicit, the offer within his so-called victory plan. But one thing that must be remembered is that in the victory plan, there's, okay, yeah, you can have a lot of our mineral resources, but we also need these security guarantees. We need to be NATO members and all that. So I think that's probably what Zelensky was always thinking. That it would something to entice the Americans to give them these security guarantees or NATO membership that they were reluctant to give. And now Trump, when he took office, he began talking about, yeah, he just wants their minerals, and it's not that, okay, yeah, it'll be packaged together with a security guarantee, but rather we're just going to take it. He's talking about $500 billion. That's I think the most recent figure. He wants $500 billion from Ukraine, and either from its rare earth deposits or other mineral assets, or even I've seen reports that maybe you would like get a cut of revenue from ports and other infrastructure. So you would get that 500 billion one way or another. And he claimed that Ukraine owes the U.S. 350 billion. And I honestly don't know where that number comes from. To my knowledge, we've given them roughly 180 billion since the SMO began, and most of that is my understanding, is in the form of outright grants. Now, some of it may be in loans. I know that Trump was making an effort to convert some of that into loans when they agreed to that $61 billion package last year. The Congress agreed to it with Trump's support. So So anyway, that's the situation now. Zelensky is outraged. In this case, I think he has a right to be outraged. I don't usually side with Zelensky, but these figures, 350 billion. He says it's ridiculous, and I think he's probably right. I mean, Trump should provide some evidence for that. I don't know where that comes from. Some people say, well, maybe it goes farther back, but still, I don't see any. I can't imagine how it adds up to $350 billion, and then how he can demand $500 billion. I think this demand, I'll just be honest, I'm very happy with a lot of things that Trump has done, but it just strikes me as highly unethical. It's somebody's described this approach of Trump's as a commercialization of politics. And it's crass, it's sordid, it's grubby, it's just, it seems to be an expression of pure greed. And in this case, it's just wrong because, I think the Ukrainians were right, understood. And they went out on a limb and went into this war. I'm not going to deny their agency in this. Clearly, there are forces within Ukraine that just wanted to fight Russia. But they made this commitment. They were pushed into it. Remember the Istanbul Agreement that the Ukrainians had initialed along with the Russians in April of 2022. That was torn up after Boris Johnson and the U.S. Came to contacted Zelensky and told him, don't do this. We've got your back. We can defeat the Russians. So he went in. He was a fool to believe that promise, but they did assure him that. And that was the language that we heard, throughout the Biden administration. As long as it takes, we've got your back. We're going to defeat the Russians. We're in this together. And now he's told that he has to give back, maybe double or triple the money that he was actually given, which didn't have those strings attached. And this is a country that's just is a wreck of, it was never prosperous, but now it's even a wreck of its former self. And how are they ever going to get back on their own two legs if they have to divert 50% of the profits? That's some of what at least the most recent reports have been saying, that the money, that whether it comes from infrastructure or if it comes from mineral resources, would be diverted into a fund which would be jointly managed, but the U.S. would take 50% of what's in that fund. I mean, that's, again, to call it unethical, I think, is being rather polite.
Right. When I first heard about this mineral deal, I had kind of the initial reaction as well that this is gross. Everything that Ukraine's been through, as much as they suffered, they were essentially a pawn of the United States, used as a battering ram against Russia, and they have suffered so much. The country's destroyed. Do we know how many people actually have fled Ukraine?
I think we probably do, at least within have a ballpark figure. It's the population of Ukraine has been greatly reduced since the start of the SMO, and that's mostly owing to emigration, whether legal or illegal. Of course, also to the deaths on the front line, but it's mostly due to immigration. I think it's somewhere in the around 10 million. That's just making a guess, but I think it's probably pretty close to that.
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, the country is just greatly diminished in every aspect. The population has been reduced. I mean, and if we look at it demographically, just the male force, which would be responsible for a lot of the driving of the economy, the working age men most of them have fled, or sadly enough, a lot of them have been died or are dead or have been severely maimed. They can't work. So, and then to hear this, that okay, we lied to you basically about all these guarantees that the previous administration gave you in the EU, and now you have to give us all that money. It does sound so callous and almost evil. But then I was just thinking a little bit more about it. Is I don't know if it's necessarily it comes off really bad, and maybe it is just straight up wrong and evil. But the fact of the matter is, I feel like these minerals have been in Ukraine for a long time, and they haven't been able to really extract much of it, from my understanding. So if we look at it in terms of investments to build infrastructure to help extract the minerals, and that this could actually be an economic driver for Ukraine in some sense, and maybe Russia could also be involved in it. And it gives you. I'm conflicted. I don't know how to feel exactly about it right now, because I get this colonial imperialistic vibes, Treaty of Versailles type of punishment for Ukraine, and that they'll be crushed. But is there a way that it could be done where this is beneficial to Ukraine as well, where they start to have some industry going, they have an economy, and they're working, and they could potentially prosper as well as all parties that are involved in this, if it becomes a joint enterprise with Russia and the U.S. that provides sort of global security guarantees in terms of that we have this economic relationship. The people that are in the region will have employment, which just right now the economy is destroyed. If we just leave now, what's going to happen to them? What are they going to be able to pick up the pieces? I don't know. I don't like the way that Trump is talking about it. Hey, we look what we've done to you. Everybody's the country's destroyed. Now give us 500 billion. That's the way he's saying it. Just sounds so like, that's not cool, man. You can't say that, right?
Yeah, right.
But then I don't know. Is there some validity in that, the thinking that I have?
Okay. Yeah. Well, the devil's always in the details. We'll have to look at the agreement when it's finally reached, which may be very soon. And if it involves a great deal of, let's say, U.S. investment, well, when a company invests in any sort of project, whether it's within the U.S. or overseas, they expect to get a share. That's the way it works. So if the terms aren't too outrageous, if you look at the details, maybe it won't be something so detrimental to Ukraine. Yeah, that's not the way, though, of course, that Trump is talking about. It may be that we'll end up with something quite different. And again, you just put Trump's words aside, look at the agreement. It might not actually be, this sordid affair, this arrangement that Trump has been talking about. Now, one thing I think that we also have to think about is, this is being presented by a lot of people, including within the administration. I believe I heard Marco Rubio say this, that if we reach this deal, that actually ties us more closely to Ukraine. We have an investment now, quite literally, an investment in Ukraine and in Ukraine's military effort, because the U.S. won't have access to these mineral resources through this deal if Russia takes the territory where the mineral resources are found. So the U.S. has an incentive, to hold the line at least, and even to push back the Russians, according to this logic.
Do you believe that logic? Because I also heard something that Putin even floated the idea of Russia and the U.S. jointly mining the minerals in the Donbass, Lugansk areas where Russia currently controls.
Right.
But I think that was met with a lot of, just, I don't know the word I'm looking for, but just a lot of pushback from within Russia, like, hey, don't get too cozy with these Americans right now.
Yeah.
But it sounds like Putin is open to the idea of he's always wanted to go to the West. We know that before. He really tried, and I feel like maybe he feels like there's an opening now with Trump. I don't know. They've been burned so many times that I'm sure they're going to be very cautious. Mm-hmm. But just from my understanding of reading some articles on RT, Trump treated Putin with respect, and I think that meant a lot to Putin. And I think Putin is realizing that this Trump is different than the previous Trump.
Right.
And it's not like all the previous administrations before, where it was like what he said, the men in the black suits come out and say this is the way things are done. Like we said before, that in a way they are allying themselves against the deep state. And I saw an interview where Putin was saying just how basically all of Europe has been essentially interfering in the election with Trump as well in terms of their support of the deep state and trying to, we know what it's been like, the lawfare, the vilification of them. So it seems like they're able to find some common ground.
Mhm.
And it makes me hopeful, but I don't know how much to read into just that relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think it's okay. Well, first on the idea of some sort of joint U.S. ventures in the territory of Russia. That seems to be something real. It's something that the Russians have brought up, more than once, several times. And Putin himself, mentioned, and that you just mentioned that Putin had made that offer again. And what he first said is just in the territory of Russia, and he said that could even include the Donbass. So he wasn't saying specifically we got to do it in the Donbass, but it could be anywhere in Russia. Yeah, well, one thing, yeah, but it wouldn't be the kind of deal, I'm sure, that he's making with Ukraine. It's going to have to be done very much on a basis of equality if they're going to make a deal like that with the Russians. And whatever deal that the Americans make with the Ukraine, it's not being made on a basis of equality. We don't know if it's really outrageous or whatever, but it's clearly that the U.S. Has is going to be able to force the Ukrainians to accept less than what they want. I mean, there's such a huge power imbalance there. So we'd be looking at something different. So still, you do have this, at least a potential for tying the U.S. to Ukraine, kind of after it looks like the relations are breaking. It could happen. Now, it may be that I sometimes think, there's a lot of what Trump does is just show, and that he get a deal and then he'll trumpet it. And then he'll maybe even just forget about it. It's not clear, actually, how this could happen. First of all, there are the territorial questions that we've talked about. We don't know where the final lines are going to be. And is it going to be, only after a peace deal? So it's just something in the far distant future. And at the point, people may, the situation will be different, and who knows, the deal, so-called, may be set aside. But it's in the short run, you can say, I made this deal, it's great for America, and then he'll forget about it. We don't know. But I mean, I don't think it's possible that he can. I don't even think there's that much and that many or that much wealth, mineral wealth within Ukraine. I think that Zelensky sort of rather foolishly now, we can see in retrospect, he foolishly overvalued it greatly to try to sell this to entice the Americans. And he thought he was going to entice them into a security deal. And now they're kind of holding him to this. Oh, yeah, you got trillions of dollars. We want some of that. Which, again, I just find really, disgusting, to be honest. It's something like, even if it is, it's all bluff. It's sort of like his talk about the Riviera and Gaza, right? It's, maybe it was never going to go. I don't think, it's not going to go anywhere. He might actually have believed in it and intended it, but it's not going to happen. But even so, it's ugly. It's something, it kind of coarsens the whole, you could say, discourse. Now, right. But now, as I've said before, maybe kind of looking at it from another angle, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Just that, yeah, this commercialization of politics is ugly, but it's better than building all your policies on lies. I just thinking about the kind of rhetoric, the neocon globalist rhetoric that the previous administration was so wedded to. I'm reminded of the title of a very good book about Vietnam by Neil Sheehan called Bright and Shining Lie. It was a bright and shining lie. It's all about, we're doing this for democracy. We're doing this for, the rules-based international order. We're doing this to defy Hitler. All of that was a lie. And you say, at least with Trump, he's talking about real things. He's not interested in these lies. And And though I find that ugly, maybe it's better. One thing is that it's just like less likely that people are going to sign themselves up and go and die, for an opportunity to exploit rare earth minerals. But sometimes people can be fooled by this rhetoric. You get those hotheads, including the guy, within the U.S., a guy who attempted to assassinate Trump. They believed in that bright and shining line. It's in a way, it's much more dangerous, and really, it's more evil.
Right. Yeah, people are going to be signing up to get rare earth minerals, but to save democracy and the world,
Right.
these big ideas, people can really get wrapped around, and like I said, ends up just being a lie. So that's true. Just the crassness, the crudeness, the openness of Trump's dealings kind of will. It just ties. It's tethered in reality. People can see it, and people can openly say, like what you're saying. I think the reaction to most people is like, "Oh, this is kind of gross." How we're just saying, "Give us $500 billion, give us your resources." I mean, it's hard not to look at it in that sort of colonial lens, where in the day you just go into a country and pillage and take what you can.
Well, yeah, some of the colonies weren't actually that bad. I speak from experience. I was born in a British colony. It was in Uganda, and at the time of my birth, it was still a protectorate of Britain. And I just know that the Ugandans actually had overall fond memories of the colonial period. It was a time of peace and development for Uganda. So the colonial history is complicated. Yeah, there are cases of just kind of outright theft, and as you say, but experiences of colonial peoples around the world varied tremendously.
Right. Like you said, the devil will be in the details. And I like to think that the way that this would play out won't be kind of that heart of darkness, kind of Congo style, where we're cracking the whip on the Ukrainians while they're breaking their backs, extracting minerals for the U.S.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't think that's
I don't
what,
see that happen. I just don't think it could happen.
right. So, I mean, hopefully, if there is some type of mineral deal, also, I believe any type of mineral deal that is reached will have to be done with the input of the Russians, right? That we can't just do this deal without them being at the table as well.
Well,
Do you agree?
well,
Or,
of course, if it's actually in territory controlled by the Russians, then it becomes something completely different. But yeah, well, I mean, it certainly does have an impact on negotiations, or potential negotiations regarding Ukraine. And so you would think, yeah, that we would be consulting with the Russians. And truth be told, again, it's not just it's not a lot of hot air. I mean, these positive statements about Russia. Just yesterday, we had a vote in the United Nations. The UN Security Council voted 10-0 in favor of a resolution that did, on Ukraine, that for the first time did not include a condemnation of Russia. Russia was not described as an aggressor, but simply, it expressed a hope for a speedy settlement. And that's a huge change. That's a huge change from past administrations. That's the UN Security Council. That's not just Marco Rubio saying something, or Trump saying something in the morning and then something else in the afternoon. It shows that they are, seem to be very serious about reorienting their policy towards Russia.
right. I mean, important, reorienting the narrative,
Yeah.
that's what it is. It's just that we've talked about how important that is. Yeah. I mean, for the longest time, we talked to, I remember talking about this to you when I was a little kid, just about the idea, like, if America is dethroned as the world hegemon, the number one spot, there's always this fear that we would take the world down with us, that we've built up this large military industrial complex. We've built up this huge narrative, US number one, the unipolar moment is a scary moment, because will we let go of that? And if I was a betting man, even just a year ago, I would say that, how does it end? Do we end with a boom, or do we go out gracefully and enter into this multipolar world? I would have said, I think the boom scenario is more likely. That seems to be the way we're heading, and just that the deep state is so strong, the neocons have such a firm grip on our foreign policy establishment, that that's where it is. But I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like it's different. I feel like we are if I put my money on it now, I would say that I think we will actually enter into this multipolar world and become part of it without going boom. And it's just that's such a great thing. I think people, if that's true, it's just such a sigh of relief the whole world, I think, should be breathing. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's still a big chance to go boom. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you
Yeah.
think we'll go
Well, I think
boom
they're.
or?
Well, I agree. I'm much more hopeful now, and I'm frankly stunned, by some of the recent developments. Stunned in a positive way. But yeah, it's not over. It's still uh, first of all, we'll say that Trump right now seems to be does really appear to be quite sincere about extending the olive branch to Russia, and it looks like he really does want this war to end. He doesn't want the U.S. to continue to support the military effort. Now, so I think there is a real chance that the U.S. might just cut off supplies. There was some claim, I think Trump himself, in fact, said it. Oh, yeah, that we're not sending, but from other sources here we are. The arms flow has not been cut off. So you never want to take any one comment by Trump, too
Yeah.
seriously. He just says stuff. That's. But even so that Trump is his words always need to be taken with a grain of salt. You usually have to divide whatever um, figure he puts out there, whatever number he gives, you have to divide by 10 or multiply by 10. It's just like he just
It helps you orientate yourself where things are going, though. You
yeah.
can't take anything too literal. It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
you
yeah,
get a
yeah. You don't
feeling
want
of
to get,
what.
yeah, he's just not a details guy. Let's put it that way. It's kind of politely, but you get a sense, his general orientation is quite obvious, and again, it was made manifest in that UN security vote. But his commitment to peace with Russia is going to be really put to the test if indeed they walk away, and I think that's a possibility because I don't think there will be a settlement. I just don't think that. Um, that the two sides will actually be able to reach an agreement on Ukraine. Certainly, there a settlement that Ukraine and Europe will agree to. But even for the U.S., I think it's very hard that they'll be able to accept Russian terms. So it's the more likely scenario is that we walk away because it seems like they really just do want to wash their hands of Ukraine. The current administration does. And it's not just Trump, I think that's important. It's the people around him, seem to like Hegseth and Marco Rubio. I think they really do want to just get out of Ukraine. And I think they're just going, they're approaching it from a realist perspective. He said, we just don't, unlike Biden who claimed, oh, we're the US of A, we can fight as many wars as we want. They understand you can't be fighting on all these different fronts. So they want to close at least one front down. Okay, but let's just say they do walk away. And then, like I've said before, what happens when the Russians cross the Dnieper, when the Russians approach Odessa, or lay siege to Odessa, or maybe even Kiev, we don't know. Um, we don't know. And then, see, I think that would be a time, what Trump his commitment would really be put to the test because he does not, people will start drawing parallels between him and Joe Biden, the fall of Afghanistan and the fall of Ukraine. And he does not want that to happen. We'll see, maybe the Russians will have a way of finessing it. I think they've actually dealt with Trump very, very skillfully. They're very, very careful not to contradict him directly. Or if they do it, that's always in very diplomatic language, unlike Zelensky. Right? And then I think like they're probably very open to something like a deal, an economic cooperation deal, because it gives Trump a win. And if if it makes sense on their side too, why not? Give him a win.
Mm.
Okay, he couldn't make a settlement, but he can come back to the American people and say, look, I did this. This means so much more wealth for us, jobs and so on and so forth.
Well,
So
wouldn't that be
maybe,
part of?
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Wouldn't that be part of a settlement though? If there was
Well,
some
it
kind
could
of
be,
economic deal?
but I don't think we're going to have that settlement. But we could do these other things. See, the thing is, maybe you fail to reach a settlement on Ukraine, but that doesn't prevent you from doing other things. Again, we could, uh, nuclear arms control treaties. That's something that we really should do. And we don't have to end the Ukraine war to do that. Or economic cooperation, a lessening of the sanctions. All of those things can be done. I think, it would be wise really for the administration just to set Ukraine aside and work on those things. And all those things benefit the U.S. They don't just benefit Russia. And if Trump can make that case, then it may be easier for him, again, to walk away and stay away from Ukraine. But I do worry, it's just like at some point the pressure to go back into Ukraine could be extreme. And Trump, yeah, it's clear he has these preferences, but I just don't find him utterly reliable. And, one thing he is very much concerned about is his own image. And if he's portrayed as a loser, and he's hopefully, he'll be politically skillful enough and he'll be helped by the Russians in different ways to avoid that stigma. But it's going to be tough going for a while.
Yeah, but I mean the idea of walking away contradicts directly with the idea of having some type of mineral deal, right? I mean, you can't walk away and then just
right. That's the thing. That's a downside to the mineral deal. It's just that, and it does contradict. In general, the rhetoric, the statements that we're getting from the administration. If you do tie yourself to it, then right, like I was saying, then you actually have an interest in trying to bolster the Kiev regime and to help them hold the line.
Right. I mean, yeah, you can't just walk away and then just be like, all right, we're going to go in and just start extracting some minerals. Don't mind us, Russia and Ukraine. Yeah, fight around us. We're,
yeah, we're right.
So to me, I mean, I just feel like Zelensky, his days are numbered. It seems clear. I mean, talked about resigning. It depends on who comes into power in Ukraine, and is it going to be I mean, how much influence? I mean, we did the Maidan coup in 2014. Is the U.S. going to put its levers on and put its own person in power? Will Ukraine, is it even capable of having democratic elections at this point? I mean, there's so many arms that have been pumped into Ukraine. You talked about the people in power are the ones with the guns. So, is it even possible to have a democratic election? Like, if you don't have a real, I believe the sentiment within most of Ukraine is that they are exhausted from this war, economically, just living in fear of press gangs, of, there's no freedom. It just sounds like a nightmare place to be right now. So I imagine they want this war to end. And then if there was a true fair election, they had a government in power that said, okay, guys, like you said, we will establish neutrality. And what's great is we are open for business for Russia and the United States. We can actually be very prosperous as this neutral place, as this bridge, this link between the East and the West. And I don't know, maybe I'm being too optimistic and naive that there's this potential to flourish. And then that, I'm sure it'll take a long, long time to rebuild, of course. But I mean, just theoretically, I feel like it's possible. And if you have a businessman like Trump, and seems to be, and the Russians also seem to be interested in doing some type of business, might be some way to get a deal that benefits everybody, because that's how deals should work, and the fear is that we just relegate the Ukraine to the sideline, and their interests aren't observed at all, when really we were just thinking about what is, will this be in the best interest of the Ukrainian people as well? Like, how much say do they have in the matter? Are they even capable of having a say in their future?
Yeah, the problem is that the regime has no interest in peace and no interest in ending the war. I mean, that's clear. I mean, the regime is currently headed by Zelensky, but you don't see anybody on the horizon that could take Ukraine to this, theoretical land of prosperity. And I agree, theoretically it's true. Ukraine has a lot of things going for it, but it has been misruled ever since it got its independence back in 1991. I mean, it's just like I've said before, Ukraine never got out of the 90s. Russia did under Putin. but Ukraine never did. It's been chaotic, it's been corrupt, it's been ruled by oligarchs and increasingly by this ultranationalist, faction, the Banderites would call them. And they have the power, and to some extent um, you know, uh, um, they've affected the thinking of the population too. In general, they were just some freaks on the right, but now they've taken control of schools and of all of the media, and it's affected the way the average Ukrainian thinks. Still there are many who, of course, oppose the Banderites, but they are powerless and yeah, yeah, you see it when you look at the opinion polls. I mean, the only other like viable candidate, the one that actually I think every opinion poll shows would defeat Zelensky soundly is Zelensky, and if anything, he's more of a Banderite than Zelensky is. Zelensky, the former head of the armed forces in Ukraine. Yeah, interestingly, actually, Putin recently discussed the possibility of Zelensky becoming president. And he said that would actually be to the detriment of the SMO, because Zelensky is just a more reasonable, realistic military leader. I remember, I think, like he was thinking, hey, we need to pull out of Bakhmut. We can't hold this. We need to pull out of Andreevka. It was around that time that he was fired and replaced by Sersky, who is just a yes man to Zelensky. And Putin said that. They just said Zelensky is just an utter fool and incompetent when it comes to military affairs. So if Zelensky takes power, and he's a Banderite, he's not interested in peace or ending the war, but he would fight the war, more effectively from the Ukrainian side, and it would take longer for the Russians to attain victory. I mean, that's a realistic thing. There's again, it's still, and it's you just don't see anybody in Ukraine that is looking that at least has a voice. Maybe because it's just not possible now. If you speak out, as many politicians and political parties have found, if you speak out for peace, you're immediately labeled, a Putin apologist, and you're likely to end up in prison, and your party is likely to be banned. That's happened again and again. So maybe we don't even know how much of an opposition is there, but it has no presence because. The people that run the country, will not allow that kind of opposition. So the candidates that we look at are Zelensky, I think Poroshenko, and Poroshenko has proven himself, during his term as president of Ukraine, that he was every bit as much a warmonger as the others.
Right.
So it just you just don't see it. Theoretically, you're right, but that's not the reality in Ukraine now. You just don't see anybody that's presenting any kind of option to the current, policies.
Well, I think Russia probably understands that, right? That there's nobody really that there's no way for in the current system, the current regime, there's no way for a real dissident party to rise. They'll just be imprisoned or killed. Do you think the U.S. is realizing that? And if both Russia and the U.S. realize that, do they have any levers and pressure that they can pull to stop that, to allow for a truly fair democratic election to take place in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, Russia doesn't have any levers.
It's military, which it's been moving constantly, right. I guess.
Yeah, but there's really nothing else they can do other than what they're doing now. The U.S. obviously does, because truth be told, again, Ukraine is just utterly dependent on the U.S. And I think most of the Ukrainian leadership, I think, or who knows, Zelensky himself seems to be deluded. He seems to be thinking, okay, we can do it alone. We and Europe, it's going to be Ukraine and Europe united. That's the kind of language you're hearing from him now. But that's just not the truth. That's not the reality. And the U.S. does have enormous leverage. It really could push them into fair elections. Yeah, that's one thing is, yeah, the question is, could they be fair? Well, if you suppressed all these parties and suppressed all opposition media, which they've done over the course of many years, that started actually well before the SMO. Some people say, well, it was wartime and President Lincoln did similar things in the U.S., but it started well before the SMO. Um, so how can you have fair elections? The people really are being denied real options. You're given a different personality, somebody who might be a bit more competent, but is subscribes to the same ideology, actually with maybe even greater fervor. Yeah, I'm talking about Zelensky, of course, and Poroshenko has shown himself to be no different from Zelensky when it comes to relations with Russia and support for the war.
You're not giving me a lot of solutions here,
I know
Dad.
I'm not. Yeah, no, it does look pretty bleak. I am hopeful about, a way that I wasn't before, cautiously hopeful about U.S.-Russia relations. One thing that's like we haven't seen the ATACMS fired into pre-2014 territory ever since Trump took office. And that's really good news. That was putting us on the brink of a major escalation that could potentially lead to World War III. And that, at least for the moment, seems to be off the table. And I think we can again be cautiously hopeful that it will remain off the table. And if we can, this ugly war is a tragedy, above all for Ukraine and secondarily, for Russia. Unfortunately, I think it is going to continue because it's just the forces that are in Ukraine. The only chance really is that the U.S. will really bear down hard on Ukraine and just say, hey, this is not going to work. We're going, maybe we can forget this mineral deal. Instead, let's actually try to bring some common sense to your leadership. Let's open things up and have a discussion about reality. Okay, can we do that?
Right.
And the U.S. has does have the levers to bring that about. So far, I haven't, I haven't seen them use it. I mean, the comments by Trump are helpful, calling him a dictator, and I think maybe we did see an impact from that within Ukraine, because it was shortly after that there was a vote taken in the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, on extending Zelensky's term, under martial law. As president, and it failed. And that never happened before. Now they took a second vote. I think it was yesterday, and then it passed. But it took some.
Why do you think that happened? Were they just threatened, guns pointed at them, say, we're doing this again?
Or at least some arm twisting. What happened? But that had to be a shock to Zelensky, and that's really a warning shot. Look, your days are numbered. And I think we can attribute that directly to the conflict between him and Trump. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, this is Zelensky is a dead man walking." He took on our main benefactor. What's he doing? That was like his main selling point. It's like, I get the goods. I go out there and people, to Europe and the U.S. and the people applaud me, and I come back with billions of dollars in arms. But now you're biting the hand that feeds you, and everyone else in Ukraine is looking at him, looking at Zelensky, and saying, why keep you now? If you're doing this, you're cutting ourselves off from our main benefactor. We better get somebody else in here.
Yeah, well, I can't imagine Zelensky staying in power much longer. But like you said, it's as long as the Banderites are in control, I just don't see. I don't see the Trump administration be able to do what they want to do with the mineral deal if they're in control either. It's like you need to have a group that is truly open for peace, that wants neutrality. Then you can be open for business in terms of anything else, right, and things can move forward.
Yeah, the corruption is also a huge problem. It's actually, the corruption is probably an impediment to this mineral deal too, because a lot of this mineral wealth, how accessible it is and how much there actually is, I'm not sure. But a lot of it was sold or given away to oligarchs, and powerful men within Ukraine years ago. And yeah, I think that's one thing that's put Zelensky in a panic. It's not just, it's like, okay, these guys they're going to turn on me if I cut them out of this. I had promised them this wealth, and that was part of what props me up. And now, hey, the U.S. is coming and demanding. It's like we had this. You made a deal with a local mafia, and then the head man from the big international mafia comes and says, "No, I want this," and he's in a terrible fix. I would not want to be in his shoes right now.
Yeah, yeah. I just feel so bad for the Ukrainians. They've been in such an awful position, and we just spent the last 30, 45 minutes just trying to find a light at the end of the tunnel, and we don't really see much of one yet. It's like there are possibilities if the U.S. really pulls some real levers, but it's all speculation at this point.
Right.
Yeah. God. Well,
what a nightmare. Maybe when it comes, to true total collapse, there is a possibility like that the army will turn on the government. The army will even sue for peace. Say we've just lost too many of our men. Enough is enough. It could happen. We're not there yet, but it might be. We can be surprised, because obviously there are these tremendous stresses that are being put on Ukrainian society and on the army. And I don't think we can assume that they're going to be solidly in support of their government, all the way to the end. There are certain units like the descendants of the Azov battalion, they're going under different names there, and other, ultra-nationalist units that probably will fight to the very end. But I don't think that's true of all the army. And there just may be a point where, civil war could break out and maybe the more reasonable forces could win and they could make a real deal with Russia. We don't see that, but it's just like you see the logic. I think that those pressures are real, those stresses are real. And I think at some point they're going to manifest themselves in real political and potentially military conflict within Ukraine.
Wow, that's scary that's a positive outcome, a civil war to overthrow, okay, well, maybe we can move over to Georgescu. You just mentioned, I saw that report as well, and I actually just saw on Reddit. Reddit is very, very anti-Putin. People saying like, "Oh my God, Georgescu is super corrupt, and here's proof he's being paid off by Putin." Picture of a bunch of cash that he had, or something like this. I don't know. Don't take what I said as anything factual. Reddit is not. But just can you tell us what's going on there and what you make of this and how significant it is?
Yeah, well, it's very significant. All I know is the initial reports that he was arrested. He was detained, I guess was the proper term. But for all practical purposes, he was arrested. He was actually in his vehicle, like in traffic, when he was stopped and arrested there right on the streets. And he was charged with I think like maybe plotting to overthrow the Constitution or something. It's maybe not those exact words, but essentially
treason
and building a fascist party, or and also with they didn't actually mention the Russians, but they said, I think, like electoral funding fraud of some kind or another, campaign funding fraud. So those are the three main charges. And it's, I think, not coincidentally, this was on this day he was going to announce his candidacy. We'll see. It's not impossible that they have something. The first two sound like they're just political, and it's probably going to be the same things. Like you're not the right kind of party. Just like the AfD should be banned because they're not the right kind of party. We don't like you. But maybe there was some real corruption. It's not impossible. There's a lot of corruption in political parties around the world, and certainly in Eastern Europe. Well, wait and see. I think you have to be highly skeptical, though, because of the timing and of the background to this. Um,
Do you think that these will stick? Like they could actually get away with this? Throw him, jail the political
well,
opponent? I mean,
if they had some real solid evidence, it could stick. It could be if they uncover just incontrovertible evidence that he was engaged in some sort of massive campaign finance fraud, um, for example. But if they don't, and certainly their earlier charges turned out to be completely false. The ones that the claims on which the annulment of the election and the cancellation of the future election um, uh, were based turned out to be entirely false. So I think we have to be highly skeptical. And if they really can't come up with anything, then um, yeah, I mean, Romania is. It, I could be teetering on the brink of an abyss. I think there's growing anger. It's just
what
quite
do you
obvious.
mean
Well,
by
it's
that?
because we've seen like growing protests within Romania. It's like, hey, you're depriving us of our vote, and it's mostly supporters of Georgescu, but not necessarily everybody out there was his supporter. They were just angry that democracy was being suppressed within Romania. And if it turns out that again, these are trumped up charges, that anger is only going to grow. I think it's also interesting that this happened not long after Vance's speech, where he really put a spotlight on Romania, what happened there. So I wonder if this was in response to this. It may have been an investigation that was ongoing, and they were planning to do this anyway. But the spotlight's been put on them. They can actually retreat, and allow the elections to proceed, or they could double down, and that's what appears to have happened. They're doubling down on their suppression of Georgescu and his party.
Would you know when this election's supposed to take place?
April or May.
And so, do you think that when you're saying on the abyss, these protests grow? Do you think there could be a revolution? They overthrow the current government? I mean, like,
Well,
okay,
yeah, I don't know Romania well enough. I just
we
know
don't
there's
have to
growing
get it.
anger. Yeah, but it is, it's gonna. Well, just think about it. I mean, if you had it, the off day, yeah, is has been increasing in strength, but it's still the most recent election in Germany put it as the second most popular party in Germany, but it was 20.5% of the vote. But Georgescu was expected to win outright, maybe to get more than 50% of the vote. So that makes it an even, let's say, more outrageous um, move by the state. And it's if you have if there's a candidate with more than 50% of the vote is simply denied the opportunity to participate in an election, that's huge. And more than half of the electorate is going to be furious.
Right?
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that
that
makes
could.
sense.
I don't know
Okay.
what that's going to lead to, but there's going to be. You imagine that there could be huge protests.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see if these stick. I'll end with a question actually from a viewer, something completely different. He wanted to know your thoughts on Alexander Dugin. I actually don't know anything about this
Oh,
guy.
okay.
I don't know if you know
Yeah.
much about Dugin as well.
Well, I know some. I remember years ago I read some of his shorter pieces. I've never read any of his books. I read actually part of a book. I started it and then got distracted. It's been happening to me a lot frequently. Um, and well, one thing is okay. I'm struck about Dugan is that he, he is looking. He's being proven right. I mean that I remember it was way back when, like in the early 2000s, that he was really talking about a multipolar world, and he's saying that Russia needs to actually turn away from Europe. And at that time, in the early 2000s, even under Putin, there was a fixation on Europe, and where there was a real attempt to become kind of reintegrate Russia into Europe. That's where all the elite were looking, and most of the people, the common people, were looking towards Europe. But he wrote that no, this is, um, um, we need to make ourselves allies of China, India, Iran. And back then, I remember actually like hearing from um, not a Russian, but somebody who's lived quite a long time in Russia and came from was a citizen of Kazakhstan. Is just saying that, that's a, we can't accept that, or the Russians can't accept that, because again, this was back in the 2000s, and there was a real focus on Islamic terrorism. What is he doing talking about actually allying himself with Muslims? Again, he was pointing particularly to Iran. Now, of course, Iran is really, in spite of what the Israelis and the Americans say, really has not been a sponsor of terrorism. But that's the view that a lot of people have, and apparently, a fair number of people in Russia that are very cautious about it. And again, they say our future's in Europe. But now look where we are, and it just seems like he was prescient. I mean, he really prophetic even. Can say that, he saw the world that was coming. And I know that, even Putin, sometimes they've described him as Putin's philosopher, but actually Putin has never, or certainly in the past, never took much of an interest in him. And clearly disagreed with him. But now it's just he seems to be, he is. I think he is being taken much more seriously within Russia and elsewhere. I don't know if he actually has any influence on the Kremlin, but in general, people who had written him off as sort of a fringe figure now look at him and say, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Now, occasionally he says things that are, maybe taken out of context, but do come out, come off as maybe a little bit as extreme as supportive of mass violence. Let's put it that way. That like recently, when the Israelis conducted a decapitation strikes on Lebanon, he said, well, he's no fan of Israel, but he says, but we have to admire the Israelis for what they did. Now, I have trouble with that. I just, maybe he was trying to make some sort of point, just showing a resolution, because he has been critical, for example, and I think with some cause, of the very restrained way in which the Russians have conducted, the SMO, that he felt like the Russians should have gone in earlier and with much more force. And he actually very well may be right about that. But sometimes he seems a little bit, to me, I've heard these various comments from him, maybe again taken out of context, but I find a little bit disturbing. Yeah, but just looking at his overall vision, it just seems like, he's proved himself to be a very insightful, even prophetic, figure.
When he made those comments about, Russia maybe being too restrained in its approach with Ukraine, he was making these for a long time, ever since the beginning? Okay.
Right, probably ever since 2014. Again, not only Dugin, but quite a few people. Of course, his daughter was assassinated.
I was going to bring that up. Daria Dugin, I know.
Right.
I was wondering if that changed his outlook on the world.
No, that preceded it. No, so he was always favoring. Now, it must be said that Putin himself said that he made a mistake to believe in the West and Ukraine, over the Minsk Accords. It was a mistake. And at that time, Ukraine hadn't built up all those fortifications. They didn't have the military power that they have now. Of course, Russia was weaker, but still relatively it was much stronger than Ukraine. And if they had gone in with force, because even just these Donbas militias, with some support from Russia, but not any heavy involvement, obvious involvement from Russia, these Donbas militias were defeating the Ukrainian army. And if the Russians had moved in, it probably could take a lot of this territory at minimal cost. And you just think about it, like these cities are being destroyed. This whole generation of men or generations of men in Ukraine are being killed or maimed. It's just that could have all been avoided. Um, Now, it's easy to say. Of course, it's in retrospect, and Putin was trying to just negotiate a settlement. Um, he was, on peace was his goal, avoiding, uh, future conflict in Ukraine. But it failed, and many of the nationalists in Russia, including Dugin, were critical of him at that time. And they're largely supportive of the man, but they were critical. They felt like he had made a mistake then. He shouldn't have trusted the West. And Putin himself has admitted that they were right about that. He shouldn't have trusted them. Now there are other things I'm sure that Putin had to consider. One thing, it's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but it's not just about military power. It's also economics. What if the sanctions from hell had been imposed on Russia right back then? Russia may not have been ready for it. I think that they had prepared, when they realized that this could happen. When it happened, they were ready, as we can see. I mean, they were, suffered remarkably little damage, but that's because they had years to prepare. And back in 2014, 2015, they hadn't made those preparations. And then Putin also has to consider his relations with other countries. That if he had gone in at that time, he may have lost the support of China and other countries that are very, very important to Russia. But by trying to work through this diplomatically, like through the Minsk Accords and then the Istanbul Agreement, he demonstrated to his partners, if nothing else, that, yeah, we really tried, but look, we failed. So in the end, war was the only option. So anyway, this is, I think some of the criticisms like Dugin and others leveled against Putin were correct, but it's maybe you're looking at the bigger picture. It's not entirely clear what Putin should have done.
Okay, well, anything else you want to add, or should we end it there?
I think we can end it there.
Okay, sounds good. Have a good rest of your day, Dad.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.